I grew up in a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. My family ran a modest hardware store, and much of my childhood was spent stocking shelves or sweeping floors. My father was a patient man who taught me the value of hard work, while my mother, a teacher, insisted on the importance of compassion and education. Life was simple but good, with weekends often spent fishing with Dad or attending community events. I first met Annie at the county fair when we were both teenagers. She was fiery, ambitious, and so different from anyone I had ever known. We connected over books, spending hours talking about the worlds we'd escaped to through stories. She told me she wanted to see the world, and while I didn't share her wanderlust, I admired her determination. By the time we graduated high school, I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. While I studied business at a local college, Annie began her career as a nurse. Those years weren't easy. We worked hard and lived frugally, saving every penny we could. Our big break came when we bought our first house. It wasn't much, a small fixer-upper, but it was ours. We spent long nights painting walls and repairing leaks, often laughing at our inexperience. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. Sally was born a few years later, and everything changed. I fell in love with fatherhood in a way I never expected. Watching Sally discover the world was a joy, and I took every opportunity to teach her what I could, from music to the importance of kindness. I still remember the day I gave her her first violin. She hated the sound it made at first, but fell in love with it over time. Annie and I both felt proud of the family we were building. As the years passed, life became a little more routine. My job grew more demanding, and Annie worked long hours at the hospital. We tried to keep the spark alive with date nights and family vacations, but something felt different. The passion we once had began to fade, replaced by the comfort of familiarity. I told myself that was just how long-term relationships worked. Looking back, I can see that Annie was quietly struggling. While I thought our life together was enough, she was yearning for something I couldn't see, something I didn't realize was missing until it was too late. That unspoken divide was the first crack in what I thought was a solid foundation. "Just sign the papers, Arthur. It's over." Her voice was calm, too calm, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't fully process what she was saying, as if her words were coming from a place too distant for me to reach. The more she talked, the more I felt like I was drifting, like I was sinking deeper into some foggy abyss. Her voice faded into the background, leaving me alone with the suffocating quiet of the moment. I don't even know when it all started. Maybe the moment I stepped through the door after work that evening. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in her hand, her face set in an expression I knew all too well. Firm, determined, and just a little hostile. There were no greetings, no warmth, just her cold stare following me as I entered. She didn't even acknowledge me beyond that look. The tension in the room was thick, the silence loud enough to feel oppressive. I knew the moment I saw her that this was no ordinary conversation. There would be no small talk, no easing into whatever she had to say. The moment I sat down, I knew there was no avoiding it. No soft build-up, no small talk, just straight to the point. Annie told me she was leaving. She'd found someone else, someone who made her feel more than I ever could. She said I wasn't enough anymore, that I'd failed her. Hearing that felt like the ground beneath me suddenly gave way. It was like a door slamming shut, cutting off everything I thought I knew about us. But even as she spoke, the sting of it began to fade. Her voice grew louder, but everything else around me grew quieter, like I was being swallowed by a hollow space. The more she raged, the less I could hear, and the more detached I felt from everything, like the world was fading, leaving me behind. Our life together had been the kind of ordinary story most people could relate to. We met in high school, stuck together through all the ups and downs. We had Sally not long after getting married. It wasn't a shotgun wedding. She wasn't the reason we tied the knot, but she was part of the plan. We both had steady jobs, nothing too flashy, but enough to live comfortably. Our house was paid off years ago, and we had some savings. We took family trips, shared quiet evenings, and though closeness had slowed down, it was still there. We still loved each other, I thought, and that was enough. We had a future, or at least I believed we did, but that was before today. Annie didn't stop. Her face reddened with every word. Her voice grew sharper, faster, more insistent, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as she was trying to convince me. "Arthur, look at me," she commanded. Her voice sliced through the fog in my brain. It was getting harder to focus, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "Sign the papers," she ordered. She pointed to the pile of documents on the table. The words blurred together as I stared at them, my eyes swimming. She spoke again, demanding, but it was like her voice was coming from far away. I couldn't make myself reach for the pen, couldn't bring myself to look down at the papers. The kitchen felt strangely darker, even though the lights were on, and I could feel the weight of it all pressing in on me, making it harder to breathe. I was shutting down inside, but my body wouldn't move. I didn't react, and the more I stayed still, the angrier Annie became. Her voice climbed higher and higher, until, in frustration, she slapped me. I didn't feel it, didn't even register the pain, but I knew it would leave a mark. Still, I stayed frozen, unable to respond. The darkness around me felt deeper, more suffocating.
It had been a strange day. The university had canceled classes because of an accident, and the power had gone out. We were all sent home early, but something didn't sit right with me. When I walked into the house, it felt wrong. The lights were on, but my mom's car was gone. My dad's was parked in the driveway, but the stillness of it all unnerved me. I dropped my bag on the kitchen chair and saw Dad sitting at the table. He didn't move or acknowledge me. He just stared ahead, completely still, his expression vacant, like he was somewhere far away. On the table in front of him was an open bottle of Mom's wine, a nearly empty glass, and a mess of papers scattered across the surface. I walked up behind him and gently put my hand on his shoulder. "Dad?" No response. I moved around the table to face him, and when I looked into his eyes, I gasped. His eyes were glazed, almost white, and tears had dried on his face. His gaze was unfocused, like he wasn't even aware I was there. A trail of saliva dripped down onto his lap, but he didn't blink or react in any way. "Dad, please, wake up!" Panic surged through me, my heart pounding as I grabbed his hand, shaking it desperately, but there was no response. Nothing. I took a step back, my mind racing. I couldn't get him to answer. I had to stay calm. I repeated to myself, "Slow down, Sally. He needs help." I pulled out my phone and called emergency, my voice shaking as I explained what had happened, telling them my father, Arthur Smith, wasn't responding. They asked for my details and address, and I gave them everything I could. They said help would arrive in about 10 minutes, but that felt like an eternity. I sat next to him, holding his hand, speaking softly, reassuring him everything would be fine, but inside, I was terrified. Dad had always been there for me, attending every school play, every recital, every event. When I first picked up the violin, he sat through hours of awful practice sessions, always encouraging me. For my 16th birthday, he saved up to buy me a Haydn violin. It wasn't the best, but it was special because it came from him. Now, here I was, sitting beside him waiting for help to arrive. But I had no idea what was happening. Why was he like this? Where was Mom? Then I saw the papers. Petition for divorce was printed across the top, and everything clicked into place. My mother was divorcing him. The reason he was like this, the reason he was completely unresponsive, was that she had left him. The papers and the wine bottle told the whole story. She had handed him the divorce papers and walked away, leaving him shattered. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and they rushed my dad off to the hospital. I locked up the house, got in my car, and followed them, my mind racing. I called Grandma, Rhonda, Dad's sister, and his best friend. Then I called his manager at work to explain Dad wouldn't be in. Everyone was asking for updates. His manager said they'd sort out emergency leave for him, but the call I was dreading most was the one to my mother. The phone rang for a few seconds before she picked up. "Hi, sweetie. How was your day?" she said, as though nothing was wrong. I could hardly hold back the disbelief in my voice. "Seriously? Just seriously?" She wasn't stupid. She knew I'd find out sooner or later. She knew exactly what I'd see when I walked in the door, and by now I was certain she knew I'd put it all together. "Where are you, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I left Dad." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. She didn't know how to respond. "So you just left him? Left your husband, my father, without a second thought?" My voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice annoyingly calm. "I tried to talk to him about Paul, but he didn't understand. I thought it'd be better if I just left. Let him come to terms with it on his own." Her attempt at sounding casual was infuriating. She didn't care about explaining anything. She just bailed on him when he needed her most. "So, you abandoned him when he was already in a bad place?" I pressed, unable to hide my disgust. "Are you really that cold?" "Sweetie, don't be mad," she replied, too relaxed for the gravity of the situation. "I know it's a shock, but your dad will be fine. I'm just asking for what's mine, and Paul is waiting to marry me." Her words felt like they had no weight, no sincerity. It was just all empty talk. "You haven't seen me angry yet, Mom," I hissed, the frustration boiling over. "And just so you know, I'm on my way to the hospital. Dad's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, but there was no real concern in her voice. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Is Paul the same one from your work?" She hesitated before answering. "Yes, darling." "So, let me guess," I pressed. "He's probably younger than you, and you've been at this for how long?" 6 months, she replied. 6 months, I repeated, my anger spiking. 6 months you've been sleeping with someone from your office behind Dad's back, lying to both of us? And now look where we are. I couldn't stop myself now. And Dad had no idea, judging by the state you just left him in. How the hell did you think any of this would be okay? She sighed. Well, I didn't expect it to go down like this. But once Paul and I live together, you'll see. We're made for each other. "We?" I said, fury rising. "You think I'll just walk away from my father to move in with you and your pathetic boyfriend?" I was shaking with rage. I'm hanging up now before I say something I regret. But just so we're clear, I'm staying with Dad. I'm not going anywhere near Paul, and you're not going to guilt-trip me into supporting your nonsense. "Sally Smith," she snapped, her tone livid. "I'm your mother, and you will not talk to me like that." I didn't say a word. "Then we're done here," I said coldly before ending the call. If she thought I'd ever accept her behavior, she was out of her mind. She tried calling back a few times, then started dialing Dad's phone, which was useless since I had it with me. I ignored every call. When I got to the hospital, Dad had already been admitted and was being monitored in a room. Rhonda, my aunt and the family lawyer, was there waiting for me. She'd received a few calls from Mom, but didn't know the full story yet. When I filled her in, her face turned bright red, and I thought steam was going to start coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the papers that woman left for my brother?" she asked, her voice tight with rage. "Yeah, I do," I replied. We settled in beside Dad while Rhonda went over the divorce papers. She read through them, muttering curses under her breath, while doctors and nurses came in and out to check on Dad. "Well, bad news, honey. Your mom's divorcing your father," Rhonda said, flipping through the documents. "According to these papers, this has been going on for over 2 months, and she was planning to file this week, just in time to avoid getting hit with a bigger legal bill." I didn't feel much. My mom had shattered everything. I didn't want Dad back with her now, not after what she'd done. It felt surreal. I had always looked up to my mom, but now I couldn't even stomach the thought of her. Rhonda continued. "The good news is she hired a sketchy lawyer. She'll have to pay a lot just for the divorce, and even more if it goes to court." Rhonda gave a small grin. "Your dad, on the other hand, has the best lawyer in town, and, lucky for him, he gets the family discount." We shared a brief dark smile. "Also, some of these demands are just outrageous. She wants half of everything. The house, the savings, plus alimony and child support. I'm guessing you're not planning to move in with her anytime soon?" I shook my head firmly. "Good. Well," Rhonda said, tapping her pen on the paper, "I've got a few ideas, but we'll need to wait and see what happens with your dad. He might need some time to recover, and your mother could be in serious trouble for abandoning him. If this goes any further, she could be facing charges for mental cruelty." I nodded slowly, still processing everything. Rhonda was our best shot now. She'd always had our backs. Mom was going to pay, one way or another. The days that followed seemed to blur together as doctors came in and out to check on Dad. Physically, he was perfectly healthy, but mentally, he remained unresponsive. I spent most of my time at his side, sitting in a hospital chair with my laptop and textbooks, trying to study when I could. Family members came by to give me breaks, and I'd go home to grab a few hours of sleep, change clothes, and then come back to the hospital. When I was alone, I allowed myself to cry more than I'd like to admit. One of the more surprising moments came when the owner of Dad's company came to visit. I had met his manager, Tom, before, but I had never seen the boss in person. To my surprise, it was a woman, Tina Williams. She was striking, with long, raven black hair, glowing tan skin, and piercing blue eyes that made everyone around her notice. I could tell from the way people reacted that she was a presence, someone who commanded attention without trying. It turned out my father had been part of a group of co-workers who had supported Tina a few years ago when she went through a difficult divorce. Her ex-husband had tried to take everything from her, her daughter, most of her savings, and even part of her business, until Dad introduced her to Aunt Rhonda. Rhonda had turned things around for Tina, securing her both her business and her daughter's future. Tina visited Dad several times, always bringing cards from everyone at work, and would sit by his side holding his hand while telling him stories from the office. It was clear that Dad had been the life of the party at work, always keeping things light and fun, and people missed him dearly. To give you a bit of context, my dad was an accountant working for a company that helped banks process payments to other financial institutions. It was a demanding job, but apparently, he had a way of making the workplace a little brighter for everyone around him. About 2 weeks later, I came back to the hospital after a short trip home. When I walked in, I saw Rhonda and Tina finishing up a conversation. Their tone was tense, but it was clear they weren't arguing with each other. The target of their frustration was my mother. "Your mom sent Tina a letter demanding half of all Dad's bonuses from the last few years," Rhonda explained. "It didn't matter that the money had already been paid. She wants 50% of it deposited into a specific account within 30 days, or she's threatening to sue." Rhonda's expression was almost carnivory as she added, "It seems like your mother and her new boyfriend are running low on cash, especially since I froze all their joint assets while Arthur is in the hospital." I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, this morning I got my first message from Mom in 2 weeks, a text asking for money." I didn't reply to her message. I was still furious with what she had done. She hadn't once asked about Dad since I told her what had happened. Meanwhile, Tina had become deeply concerned about how Dad was feeling emotionally. Every time Mom's name came up, Tina's eyes would narrow and her voice would drop, clearly showing how much she disliked her. I sometimes thought I saw actual flames flicker in her eyes. I just hope they never have to be in the same room, I thought. Mom might end up burning it all down. Though my feelings for my mother had soured, she was still my mother. It hurt knowing she'd destroyed the most wonderful person I knew. "Sally, if it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarissa or my business," Tina said quietly. "A lot of people helped me during my roughest time, but your dad really went out of his way. He listened without judging me or my ex-husband. He just let me vent, and no one else ever did that for me. He even introduced me to your aunt, ensuring I had the support I needed." Tina paused, her eyes softening. "If he were a single man, I'd be chasing him down." I smiled a little. Well, he'll be a single man soon enough. It was as if a light bulb went off in both Tina and Rhonda's heads. Rhonda laughed and Tina smiled warmly. "Thank you, Sally," Tina said, her voice full of gratitude. "I really needed that." "I still can't believe your mom did this to him," Tina added. "How could she walk away from such an incredible man?" Tina had to head back to the office, but before she left, she walked up to Dad's bed. Rhonda and I watched as she leaned down and gently kissed him on the lips. Tina turned to us with a smile, but her expression shifted in an instant when Dad groaned softly.
I woke up with the sensation of soft lips against mine, applying just the right pressure. It wasn't an invasive kiss. It was tender, full of intention and warmth. The sound of medical equipment beeped in the background, and I felt the pain in every muscle of my body. I opened my eyes, expecting Annie to be there, hovering above me, but instead, I saw Tina's face, her smile comforting. Sally, Rhonda, and Tina stood beside me. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to be all right," Sally reassured me. As my memories clicked back into place, I realized the last thing I remembered was Annie telling me she was leaving. The truth hit me like a wave. "What happened?" I asked weakly. The three women filled me in on the details: how Sally had found me unresponsive and called for an ambulance, how she'd uncovered divorce papers that revealed Annie had been cheating for years. 2 weeks, Rhonda said. I turned to Tina. Did you kiss me? Tina blushed. Yes, sorry about that. I was just heading to the office to say goodbye, she added. I smiled. It's fine, really. Everything's okay. The next few hours were a blur of doctors and tests, exams, blood draws, MRIs. Tina canceled her office visit and stayed with me, along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors who came in was a psychologist. I told him about the moment I came home to find Annie drinking alone and telling me she was leaving. As her anger escalated, I felt the world around me dim and fade. The last thing I remembered was Annie punching me in the face and screaming, though I couldn't make out the words. The three women gasped when they heard about the misuse while I was unresponsive. Dad, when do you think this happened? Sally asked. I'd say around 5:30, I replied. Why? Because it was after 7:30 when I got home and found you, Sally explained. So Mom must have left you there alone for a while. The psychologist spoke up. It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to be misused while they're unresponsive. Shock can trigger this sort of response. In your case, the shock likely came from hearing your wife announce she was leaving. It's extreme, but it makes sense. Rhonda added, when Arthur was younger, there was a bully who used to tease him. One day he was found lying in the park, unconscious. Our parents didn't think much of it, but he woke up the next day, and when he told them about the bully, they went to his parents. After that, the boy apologized and never bothered Arthur again. I smiled at the memory. I don't think it was genuine, but after that, he left me alone. The psychologist grinned. It seems like there's a pattern. The mind doesn't always react predictably, but given that this has happened before, it makes sense that it could happen again. I frowned, and the psychologist gave me a reassuring smile. Don't worry too much. With the love and support of these wonderful women, even if something happens again, you'll be in good hands. I was exhausted. It might sound strange considering I'd just spent 2 weeks in a hospital bed, but I was drained. I decided to send the three women home for some rest, telling them to come back tomorrow to check on me. Over the next couple of days, I started to feel like myself again. Tina brought me a work laptop and gave me a few light tasks to keep me busy. Rhonda stopped by to show me the updated divorce papers and to get my signature so she could begin the process of dissolving my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought a young detective named Karen Hill with her. Detective Hill spent over an hour questioning me about that night with Annie. After she thanked me, she told us we would receive her official report in a few days. I wasn't entirely sure if we were pursuing legal action against Annie, but Rhonda was already taking charge. Leave it all to me, she said, with a reassuring kiss on my forehead before she left. By that afternoon, I was discharged from the hospital, just as Sally had predicted. She helped me home, and to my surprise, Tina was waiting for me. She assisted Sally in getting me into her large SUV. That evening, Tina stayed for dinner. We ordered takeout, and she helped clean up afterward. We spent a couple of hours watching TV before she said her goodbyes. As Sally hugged Tina, I walked her to her car. Tina, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done over these past few weeks, I said. Tina smiled. Well, once you're feeling better, you can take me out for dinner and dancing. I blushed. I just left the hospital a few hours ago, and the woman who kissed me awake already has a date planned, I joked. Next Friday evening, after work, Tina replied. That'll give you nearly 2 weeks to recover. She gave me a warm hug, lingering a little longer than usual. As she drove off, I couldn't help but wonder for a moment about the strange woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. Over the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina continued to look after me. It was comforting to have such good people around. But on Friday afternoon, Rhonda dropped a bombshell. Annie was arrested today, she said. What happened? I asked, stunned. After your statement to the police, a warrant was issued for Annie's arrest for mental cruelty toward a person with disabilities, Rhonda explained. Since you were unable to defend yourself at the time and she left you alone for an unknown amount of time, they've got a solid case. Tina, who had joined us for dinner, raised a concerned eyebrow. What does this mean for the divorce? Rhonda gave a confident smile. It's moving forward. It should take about 3 months. If Annie wants to contest it, I'll pull out all the stops. But that will only drag things out and hurt her more in the end. I nodded. Annie won't get her hands on any of the bonus money she tried to take from you, Tina. I filed charges against her for extortion and mental cruelty. This won't change much, but it'll stop her from touching things that aren't hers. She'll probably be out in a few days, none the worse for wear, and head right back to her boyfriend. What I'm focused on is settling the divorce quickly using Arthur's hospital visit as leverage. After that, I have plans. Depending on Annie's response, I'll make sure Arthur doesn't lose anything important. Sally looked at Rhonda. How long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda? I'm hopeful it'll be wrapped up in 3 months. If Annie fights it, we'll stretch it out longer, but it'll hurt her in the long run, Rhonda answered with a satisfied grin. Later that evening, I walked Tina to her car while Sally helped Clarissa into the back seat. As Tina gave me another hug, she surprised me with a quick kiss. Arthur, I know you're married, and I respect that. I'm not going to rush you, but I want you to know I want you. I've wanted you for a long time, but I would never go after a married man or break vows. I've been on the other side of that, and I don't want to do that to anyone else, even if their marriage is falling apart. I looked into her piercing blue eyes for a moment before brushing a strand of her dark hair away from her face. I leaned in to kiss her, but this time, it wasn't a soft peck. I kissed her deeply, passionately, and for about 30 seconds, we shared a connection that left both of us breathless. As I pulled away, Tina's eyes were closed, her lips lingering on mine as if savoring the moment. I smiled. Just so you know, I'm confirming your claim. We turned around to see the girls watching us. Clarissa was clapping, and Sally had a mischievous grin on her face. As Tina and Clarissa drove off, Sally hugged me tightly, and we waved goodbye. The following months were full of emotional ups and downs. Annie wanted the divorce to be finalized quickly, but she wasn't satisfied with the terms. It seemed like Paul had a heavy influence over her, convincing her she deserved the lion's share of the assets. He spun a web of lies, and while she probably knew better after all these years, she still let herself be swayed. As the demands for the settlement became more and more unreasonable, Rhonda made one phone call to Annie's lawyer. I'm not sure what was said, but the very next day, all of Annie's objections to the settlement vanished. Tina and I began spending every Friday evening together. Meanwhile, Sally took on the responsibility of picking up Clarissa from school and watching her, giving Tina and me the freedom to go out to dinner, have coffee, watch a show, or sometimes even dance. We kept things simple, just holding hands and sharing a kiss here and there. But something told me that the night the divorce was finalized would be different. Work was going well. Our financial institution was profitable, but we weren't exactly on the cutting edge. We did our jobs, got paid well, and had a good time as a team. Word got around the office about Tina and me becoming a couple. While everyone seemed happy for us, I had to tone down my usual behavior. My manager, who reported directly to Tina, made sure there were no rumors circulating about us, considering I was now working closely with his boss. About 3.5 months later, we got the notice that the divorce would be finalized in a week, starting the following Thursday. There was no trial, but Annie requested a final meeting before the ruling. I agreed to meet with her, and we decided she would come to our house to speak with both Sally and me. I took the afternoon off to cook dinner, a dish we all loved, lamb chops with dumplings and gravy. I hoped it would make the evening a bit less tense. Sally came home around 5:30, showered and changed. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Annie stood there, and for the first time in a long while, I actually saw her clearly. I hadn't really described her before, but now seemed like the right time. A few months ago, Annie had been an attractive housewife in her early 40s, short brown hair, a curvy figure, and despite carrying a little extra weight, she was still undeniably beautiful. But the woman standing at my door was hardly recognizable. She had gained a lot of weight. Her face was fuller, her cheeks puffy, and her belly, once just a little protruding, now hung over her waistband. The shapely figure I had once admired was gone. She wore loose, baggy clothes, trying to hide her weight gain. I'm not one to judge someone for their size, but this wasn't Annie. I must have looked shocked, because Annie winced, but didn't say anything. "Hi, Annie. Please come in," I said, guiding her to the kitchen. I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted. We made small talk for a few minutes. She asked about my work and if I was taking care of myself, while I asked her the same. I didn't mention her appearance, though I couldn't help but notice how different she looked. "Paul wanted me to gain weight," she said, almost defensively. "He didn't like how thin I was, so we worked on that." She was hinting at the unspoken. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel concern. "You don't approve, do you?" she asked, looking at me. "No, Annie, I don't," I replied honestly. "When we were together, you were healthy and in great shape. I'm shocked by what I'm seeing. You don't look well, and if I wasn't so hurt by what you did, I'd be very worried about your health. But I don't think you care, do you?" Her expression faltered. "You and Sally, you're both happy and healthy without me." "Well, part of me still cares," I said, my voice softening. "But when you left me here, abandoned me when I needed help, I don't know how to feel about that." She sighed. "I deserve it. I did something terrible, didn't I?" Just then, Sally walked in, fresh from her shower. "You did a horrible thing, Mom," Sally said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You destroyed a family, then walked away like it didn't matter. And I don't know why Dad's even letting you be here tonight." "Sally, calm down," I intervened. "Your mother knows the situation. She knows how all of us feel. She asked for this meeting, so let's at least listen to what she has to say." Sally wasn't happy, that was clear. She hadn't spoken to Annie since the incident, and the tension between them was palpable. It was time to change the subject. "Look, difficult conversations aren't best done on an empty stomach," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Let's eat first." Dinner was served, but the atmosphere was tense. No one spoke much, though there were plenty of side glances, especially from Sally, who couldn't stop staring at her mother. Afterward, as I cleared the table, Annie asked if she could speak to Sally alone. "Not a chance," I said. "You can tell me whatever you want in front of both of us." Sally was adamant she wouldn't be alone with her mother, and I could see that Annie was starting to understand why. The expression on her face was exactly the same as it had been that fateful night when everything fell apart. Annie hesitated before speaking. "I didn't want to do this in front of you, but I'll say it anyway. Sally, I want to ask you to forgive me. I know I made a terrible mistake, and I don't want to be apart from my daughter forever." She then turned to me. "There's one more thing, but I'd rather say it privately." "Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it," Sally snapped. Without waiting for her mother to respond, she stood up and stormed off, slamming her bedroom door behind her. "I wanted everything to go better," Annie said quietly, almost to herself. "I think it went as well as it could have," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Really?" Annie asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "Yes," I answered with a deep sigh. "But you need to understand that the people in this house don't exactly like you right now." Annie opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Let me finish. First, you had an affair with that idiot Paul. Then you hid it from both Sally and me. You blindsided me with divorce papers, and when I couldn't react fast enough, you slapped me. Then you left me, abandoned me when I was clearly in no shape to be left alone. And when Sally found me, you never even checked in on me." Annie looked at me wide-eyed, as if I had just slapped her back. "And when Sally was clearly worried about her father, you showed no concern for me whatsoever. You made unreasonable demands at work, and when you came here tonight, you made it all about you. You asked for forgiveness from Sally, but you didn't apologize to her once." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Yes, Annie, I think that went really well, all things considered." Her eyes were downcast, and I could see tears forming, but not falling. I wasn't sure if they were for me, for Sally, or for herself, but it didn't matter. "Tomorrow, our divorce will be final," I told her. "If there's nothing else, then I think we've wrapped up your final request." I stood up and walked to the door, opening it for her. Annie lingered in the doorway for a moment, then looked back at me. "Arthur, we really did have some good years, didn't we?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, Annie, most of our time together was wonderful. You were a great wife, a wonderful lover, and a good mother. I don't know what Paul did to you, but the woman I fell in love with is gone. All I see now is someone who's been manipulated into becoming something unrecognizable." She didn't respond, just stared at the floor. Then, softly, she asked, "You really mean it, don't you?" "I do," I said, my voice firm. Annie turned to leave, but stopped one last time. "Arthur, about the house and the money, Paul told me I should ask." So that's why she was here. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about money. I laughed bitterly, and Annie looked at me confused. "Go back to Paul," I said, my voice cold. "Tell him that by tomorrow you'll get your share of the savings and equity in the house. It'll be transferred to the bank account Rhonda set up." She looked at me, still confused. "And listen," I added, "keep that money away from Paul. If he gets his hands on it, you won't have it for long." The next morning, the divorce papers were finalized. Annie and I were officially no longer married. I felt a slight sadness, but it was hardly anything compared to the relief and freedom I felt. The past few months had been tough, but now I was free to move forward with my life. At 48, I knew there was still so much ahead of me. Rhonda called to let me know she'd be bringing pizza over that night. Sally also stopped by the office for lunch. We ended up talking about her mom and reminiscing about better times when our family was still intact. Sally didn't have much affection for her mother, but I could tell she missed the woman Annie used to be. Honestly, I missed that version of her too. We had many good years together. It was clear Sally and Tina shared a moment when she left the office. Less than 5 minutes after Sally walked out, Tina called me into her office. She shut the door behind me and kissed me like the world was ending. Honestly, I kissed her back the same way. "Can I officially say you're mine now, Arthur?" she asked, her lips still near my neck, where I could feel the warm spot from her kiss. "I think you already have," I replied with a grin. That night, we had a celebration dinner with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarissa. We toasted to my newfound freedom and to the fresh start ahead. Later that Friday, after the kids had gone to bed, Tina and I took our relationship to the next level. I must have done something right because for the rest of the weekend, every time she sat down, she gave a little wince of pain. But those fiery, smoldering looks she gave me told me it was all worth it. By the time 6 months had passed, we were married in a small ceremony by a lake with close friends and colleagues from work. We had initially planned to wait, but we wanted to tie the knot before Sally and Clarissa's little brother arrived. 5 years later, Tina and I were out to dinner with Sally and her boyfriend when we were interrupted by a 5-year-old voice asking, "Dad, who's that lady staring at us?" We all turned to see Annie, now thinner, sitting across the room. She was staring at us with an expression that made it clear she wasn't happy with where things had gone. We hadn't heard from her in years, and she had never made an effort to reach out to Sally. I excused myself and went over to her. "Hi, Annie," I said. "Hey, Arthur," she responded, her eyes down on her chicken salad. "How have you been?" "You were right about him," she said suddenly. "Paul convinced me that he was my soulmate and you were nothing. But when I didn't get the money up front, he convinced me to gain weight, saying it was because he loved me and preferred larger women. After the divorce, I didn't listen to your advice about keeping the money to myself. He blew through it in a few months and then left me, without even marrying me." Her story wasn't the happy ending I'd found, but I couldn't help but feel a little sympathy. Still, I wasn't completely over the past, especially the way she had walked out on us. She was fighting back tears now, and I could see the remorse in her eyes. "I was wrong," Annie said, her voice shaking. "I know you can't forgive me, but I'm so sorry, Arthur. I left the only man who ever truly loved me, and I almost destroyed you in the process." Sally had quietly approached us and stood next to me. She had heard her mother's apology. I squeezed her hand and smiled at her. I could see her softening toward her mother, maybe for the first time in years. Sally reached out to her mom, her face full of compassion. Seeing Sally extend her hand made Annie panic. She tried to stand up and walk away, but Sally stepped in front of her. "Mom, stop. You're not going anywhere." Sally slid into the booth next to Annie, and I joined them. Tina looked on and gave me a nod. For the next hour, mother and daughter talked. There were a lot of tears, but they were good tears. Healing ones. By the end of it, Sally and I brought Annie to our table and introduced her to everyone. Annie didn't seem thrilled to be introduced as Aunt Annie to Keegan, but she took it in stride. From that point on, we allowed Annie back into our lives, slowly at first. Sally began to rebuild her relationship with her mother. They had coffee together every couple of weeks, and over time, the trust between them grew, little by little. When Sally got married, Annie played a role in the wedding as the mother of the bride. Tina invited her over for dinner occasionally. At first, I think it was more out of a sense of justice. Tina had gained a lot after Annie had walked away from our family. But eventually, Tina and Annie developed an odd yet genuine friendship. I never fully understood it, but it worked for them. Rhonda, on the other hand, never forgave Annie. She was always polite, but there was no mistaking the coldness between them. As for me, with Tina's support, I did a little post-divorce counseling with Annie. We talked through everything that had happened more than 5 years ago. The therapist suggested Annie might have had some hormonal issues at the time, but Annie denied it. "No," she said firmly. "What I did wasn't about hormones. I threw away the best thing in my life. Arthur, a loving husband, and Sally, a daughter who wanted me. No hormone imbalance could explain why I threw everything away for a guy who was nothing but a liar. I let a fool convince me to destroy my life." She looked at me with a sad smile. "You and Sally deserved so much better from me." She wiped away the tears that had started to fall. It took 5 years to reconnect. 5 years I'll never get back. I'm thankful every day that Arthur let me back into his life. And Tina, too. She blushed as she said Tina's name. She had every right to hate me, but she didn't. She treated me like a person. Honestly, she was lucky, Annie continued. She got everything I tossed away, and I'll never stop paying for that. That therapy session was helpful for me in some ways, mostly confirming that neither Sally nor I were to blame for Annie's actions. She was right. I had no regrets. Tina and I had created a strong family, and we were happy. As for Paul, he hadn't fared well. He moved away to another state and tried once again to charm his way into a married woman's life, but this time, the husband caught him. The result? Paul was left neutered. He got 10 years in prison, though rumor had it that he might be out soon, if Rhonda's sources were correct. Tina and I are deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone like I loved Annie, but Tina proved me wrong. She gave me not just her love, but her soul, completely and unconditionally. We still work at our company, and I still have the same job. We've had our ups and downs, but communication is always the priority, no matter what. Tina's body is still incredible, and we continue to have a very active and passionate relationship. During vacations, we've been known to sneak off and make love in exotic locations. A glance is all it takes for us to fall back into each other's arms. One day, after we had just finished making love and were getting dressed, we walked into the kitchen and found Sally and Annie chatting. It turns out Sally was pregnant, and the buzz in the room was about my first grandchild. Tina looked at me with a playful smirk. "You need to tell me what you're feeding Arthur. I think Fred could use some of that." We all laughed and I blushed. Annie had been dating recently, but it seemed like things were starting to get serious with a man named Fred. Sally teased, "Oh, Mom, you know Dad was a man on a mission once he got his health back." "Since when?" Annie asked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, you know," Sally grinned mischievously. "I think his libido went up a few notches since he woke up after everything happened." Annie went quiet, looking away. Sally laughed, Tina blushed, and I just leaned back, grinning. I felt that familiar heat rise within me as I looked at Tina, and before long I was back in the bedroom with her, locking the door behind us. And yes, I was definitely checked out. The months that followed the divorce were a blur of change and self-discovery. I had been plunged into a sea of uncertainty, but slowly, piece by piece, I found my footing. Life, in a strange way, began to feel like it was starting anew. The things I thought I had lost forever, my sense of self, my confidence, and even my capacity to love again, were not gone at all. They had simply been buried beneath the rubble of betrayal and heartache, waiting for the right time to resurface. Tina was my anchor during this time. She had a way of quietly reminding me of the value of patience and kindness, even when I didn't feel like I had the strength for either. Her understanding, paired with her fierce devotion, provided the stability I had lacked for so long. I had been broken, no question, but she didn't judge me for it. Instead, she gave me the space to heal, and she did it in a way that made me feel like I wasn't a burden. I often thought about how different she was from Annie, how Tina's love was neither a demand nor a performance, but a quiet, steady presence. The first few months with Tina were about finding our rhythm. At first it wasn't easy. I was still haunted by memories of the past, and Tina, though patient and loving, had her own battles to fight. She had become my partner not just in love, but in a shared mission to help me rebuild my life. We started slow, weekends spent watching old movies, long drives that didn't go anywhere, dinner dates where the conversation flowed easily. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people figuring out what came next. Sally, as always, was my rock. Though she was navigating her own journey into adulthood, she always made time for me. We spent hours talking about everything, her music, her future, and what had happened between me and Annie. It was impossible for me to completely shield her from the pain of what her mother had done. But Sally was resilient. She never blamed me, and in many ways, she became the adult in our relationship, pushing me to move forward when I felt stuck. Her belief in me was unwavering, and it was something I clung to. I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. There was a time when I thought I couldn't bear the weight of everything. The shock of Annie leaving, the way she just walked out and left me there, abandoned when I was most vulnerable. The confusion, the feeling of being suffocated by everything that had crumbled around me. And yet here I was, standing stronger than I had in years. The process of letting go, of truly accepting that Annie and I were over, wasn't as painful as I had imagined. It was freeing, The chains had been broken, and I was finally breathing again. At work, things started to shift as well. My role, while never glamorous, had always been steady, and I found a renewed sense of purpose in it. I started taking on more responsibility, contributing ideas, and feeling like I had something to offer beyond the confines of my broken marriage. When I began working more closely with Tina at her company, it felt natural. She trusted me in ways that made me feel valued, not just as her partner, but as a person. There was no competition between us, no power struggle, just mutual respect and support. The thing that stood out the most during this time was the way Sally and Tina began to bond. Tina's daughter, Clarissa, and Sally formed an unexpected but undeniable friendship. It was strange at first watching them share inside jokes and act like sisters. But it was also beautiful. I had never seen Sally so open with anyone outside of our immediate family. It was clear that Tina's presence in our lives was something Sally needed, someone who offered not just love, but also a model for strength and independence. Tina's warmth extended beyond just me and Sally. She started inviting Annie back into our lives in small ways. At first, it was awkward, to say the least. Annie's apology was a slow, painful process, but she seemed to truly want to make amends, especially with Sally. For me, it wasn't about forgetting what she had done, but about finding a way to live in a space where I could move forward without harboring bitterness. It was clear that Annie's journey wasn't over. She still had much to reconcile within herself. But for the sake of Sally, I allowed her back into our lives, little by little. The day Sally told me she was pregnant was one of the most surreal moments of my life. In many ways, it felt like a full-circle moment. I had spent years teaching her how to navigate the world, and now she was teaching me how to navigate this new chapter of life. I was going to be a grandfather, something I had never imagined for myself. It was a new kind of love, a love that transcended time and carried the weight of generational continuity. Sally, full of ambition and passion for her music, was now beginning a family of her own, and in that moment I couldn't have been prouder. The healing process for Annie was much slower. Her appearance had changed. She had gained weight, and the vibrancy she once had seemed faded. She was different, physically and emotionally, but the most striking change was the regret that now seemed to hang over her like a cloud. I could see it in the way she spoke to Sally, the quiet apologies laced with guilt. And yet, her journey was hers to make. I had done everything I could to help her see the consequences of her actions, and now it was up to her to find her way. She had done irreparable damage, but as time passed, I started to see glimmers of the woman I had once loved. Annie's efforts to rebuild her life were messy, but she tried. She ended up with Fred, a man who seemed to offer the stability she had longed for. It was a strange kind of peace that settled over me when I saw them together. Fred seemed to be good for her, and while I didn't want her back, I knew that this new chapter in her life was what she needed. In a way, it was comforting to see her settle into something. Whether or not it was love was a question I didn't feel the need to answer anymore. Tina and I continued to grow closer, our bond cemented not just by our love, but by the shared vision we had for our future. When I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the loss, I couldn't help but be grateful for the life I was now living. I wasn't the same man I'd been when I married Annie. I'd been tested in ways I never imagined, and though the road had been rough, it had led me here, to Tina, to a family that was stronger than I ever thought possible. One evening, while we were sitting in our living room, Sally came to us with news that took us by surprise. She had decided to go on a short tour with her orchestra, something she had always dreamed of doing. It was a proud moment for me. She had worked so hard for this, and I was thrilled that she was finally getting the chance to step into the spotlight. It was also a moment of personal growth for me. I had always been her protector, her guide, but now I was learning to let go and trust that she was ready for the world. Tina and I, ever the supportive partners, decided to take a much-needed vacation. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a quiet weekend in the mountains. But it felt like a celebration of where we were, of what we had become together. As we sat by the fire looking out at the stars, I realized that my life had gone full circle. I had once thought that I would never recover from losing Annie, but now here I was, surrounded by people who loved me, building a future that was mine to shape. The day Sally gave birth to her child was the final chapter in a long and emotional journey. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Holding my grandchild in my arms for the first time felt like a divine gift. Tina, Sally, and I spent hours marveling over the tiny miracle that had arrived. There, In the quiet hospital room, I realized that the pain of the past had been worth it. It had led me to this moment, to this new beginning. Years passed, and life settled into a beautiful routine. Sally's career flourished, and Tina and I built a life together that was full of love and laughter. Annie, while still a part of our lives in some small way, had become a distant memory. Her story was no longer intertwined with mine, and I was at peace with that. I'd learned that closure didn't always mean forgetting. It meant finding the strength to move forward. Tina and I still work together, still share our dreams, and still find moments of joy in the little things. We've become a team in every sense of the word. We've weathered the storms of life, and each time we've come out stronger on the other side. I never imagined I could be this happy again, but here I am, living a life full of love, laughter, and a deep sense of fulfillment. And so as I sit back and reflect on the years that have passed, I realize that life is never linear. It's full of twists, turns, and moments that test us in ways we never expect. But with the right people by your side, the storms can pass and the sun will shine once again. And in the end, that's what matters most. The people who stand with you, the love that holds you together, and the future that still awaits.